And I'd like to read a poem that's for those high offices across the river. It's called Horses. At 17 hands, their high-traction shoes clatter the asphalt as they canter forward, snorting. Perspex face shields, a clear armor for their wild-eyed vision of Molotov cocktails, stones, hurled debris. The adrenaline of the boulevard ringing in the horns of their ears, reflective shin guards glinting above mid-cannon and coronet, blare of the flashbulbs cracking the night open in a pure shock of light, illuminating the signature of blaze and star on forehead and nose, as polycarbonate batons sing past their stiffened ears before they wheel and turn, the boot heels of officers digging in, spurring their flanks, the curtains of their lips pulled back by a cinching of the reins at the bit, slobber straps wet and shining, their wide, flat teeth biting at the invisible before them as their nostrils fill with the fear and smell of burnt exhaust, with the human calculations of misery and pain, trajectory and loss, brokenness, ruination, the factory of tears in its awful manufacture gone unbridled in civilization's rough housing. And still the officers urge forward as the missiles trace the bright geometry waiting patiently within the night's dark fabric, the obscene beauty of it lost on no one. The clarity of hooves hammering against the building facades, rising to the upper stories, just as hooves have done for millennia, clanging through Damascus and Prague, Vladivostok and Rome, with hussars and Cossacks and Mamluks, lancers and dragoons forming up horses abreast. The psychology of muscle and height joined by the long history of the cavalry in its relentless charge. And just as horses did in the days of old, these horses shove and shoulder through the protesters in their human chicane. The trampled left curled on the roadbed behind, wailing as police lights strobe the moment in a wash of red, color standard for the god of war, the god of helmets and boots and stirrups and sweat-soaked horse blankets, who promises steamed oats and top-cut alfalfa at the road's end, god of the threshing hooves, the riot god, who quickens panic in the driven horse by application of the baton to the curvature of this world in its bony skull, the god who stirs the blood into action against the refutations of consent, pressing the horses on into the valley of placard and protest, effigies rising from the crowd as if their leaders had lost their footing in the world and simply rose up in flame, up to the howling god, who calls on the horses to do the same, exhorting each to ignore the monocular field within the crazed eye, to view the crowd from those rare heights where flame burns free of its fuel, to rise up on its hindquarters as in a great statue of terror, its majesty irrefutable, the god of the loudspeaker commanding them to spark the pavement, saying, "Bring your hooves down hard, my horses, bring them down." Don't let the bastards do it. They're right across this water, and they wage war on cities like Fresno and Newark and Detroit. You can see the war. You don't have to go overseas to find a war. And if you only knew that your clapping sounds like small arms fire. This is called Call It Leaves and Rain. I was walking through the middle of my life, walking down Divisadero Street wearing old desert combat fatigues, listening to the antifreeze boil over. I was listening to the antifreeze boil over in conversations on the street, that dead-end steaming hiss of radiators run 100,000 miles and more. The radiators boiled over in fatigue while I was walking 100,000 miles down to Divisadero Street in Fresno, and it was July, and the asphalt was speaking its vapor, and I was wearing combat boots and walking through the middle of my life. I was listening to war. I was listening to war on Divisadero Street and learning how to ride low through the rest of my life, learning how to walk the blocks in tighter and tighter circles, the way the lost do. In tighter and tighter circles, I was lost to the war on Divisadero Street. I was circling the war the way vapor curls from the steaming hiss of dead radiators in Fresno. I was circling the lost in Fresno, wearing my combat boots worn down 100,000 miles and more, and counting. And I was counting. I counted each dying face passing by. I counted the birds with their exhausted voices. I counted the sentinel birds perched silent in the eucalyptus trees above. I circled the eucalyptus birds and listened for their medicine the way the lost do in Fresno, wearing combat boots and speaking in vapor. I was circling through the middle of my life, right there under the medicine trees, listening to the silence of the sentinel birds and waiting for them to boil over and steam. But that's not what medicine birds do. Medicine birds break open in orange and red. Medicine birds have eucalyptus leaves for feathers and bandage the air when they fly. Medicine birds fly through the windows and the head impervious to glass. They are impervious to war and hiss and steam and vapor and combat and the circling lost. Medicine birds fly through the windows to land in our beds when we're dreaming our circling dream of Divisadero and Fresno with its lost and circling war. Medicine birds have eucalyptus wings, and when they fly in our beds, they transform themselves into leaves and rain and lovers. The lovers in our beds are eucalyptus birds, flying medicine through the windows in our heads. The lovers in our medicine beds fly eucalyptus through the circling loss. The lovers in our beds bring medicine to our lips and call it eucalyptus, call it love, call it leaves and rain for our exhausted souls. Thank you.
Brian Turner.